Welcome back, folks. It is time for another edition of the No Judgment Zone. This is the Red Flag Law edition. I'm Phil Buck. Thanks for coming by. And again, the No Judgment Zone is kind of, where we explain stuff that you're either too busy to read about or you might be too embarrassed to ask about. There's been a lot of talk this week so far about red flag laws. We heard the president bring them up in his national address on Monday. We've heard other lawmakers call for these, even going back before this weekend's shootings. Well, here we're going to run down the basics. Maybe you don't know a lot about these laws. We're here to help. First off, the extreme basics. What is a red flag law? Now, basically, these are laws that can allow a judge to restrict somebody who has been deemed to pose a threat to either themselves or others in the general public from accessing or buying a gun. Here in Florida, we actually already have a red flag law on the books, and it was one of the components that was in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act that lawmakers passed last year after the shooting at Parkland. And so that's already on the books. But this week, after the El Paso and the Dayton shootings, we have seen lawmakers here in Florida, they've introduced another bill. Forgive me here as I'm trying to work my way through this. It's a bill that was introduced last year and actually died in committee in Tallahassee. They have now reintroduced this bill. What it would do is expand the scope of who would be allowed to petition the court for a risk protection order. Right now, under the current law, it's got to be somebody in the criminal justice system, whether it be law enforcement, judges. Judges need to make the ultimate decision, but it can come from the law enforcement angle. This would expand the scope to family members. So if I were worried about my sister, and thinking she could pose a threat and she owned firearms, if this were the case, then I could, as a family member, petition the court for a risk protection order. Now, Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, Pinellas County Sheriff here, he's also the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, and he also sits on the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission. I asked him about this expanded scope of the red flag law. Here's what he told me about why he does not support that.
I don't support that, and the reason I don't support that is I don't see a need for it. Is the people have the absolute ability today to get that in court and get that before a judge, and that is to call law enforcement. And one of the things that concerns me about people off the street being able to go in and petition the court is some people do that with not good motives. Some people do it vindictively. They're doing it to get at somebody. And I can tell you that we have a very strict and rigorous oversight process. So when a law enforcement officer in Pinellas County comes across a situation, they evaluate it. So there's the first level of review. If they think it meets the criteria and it's the right thing to do, then it's reviewed by a supervisor. If the supervisor then approves it and concurs, then it goes to a lawyer within our general counsel's office. There's a level of review there, and if it passes all of that, then it goes to a judge. And a judge is going to review the petition and make a decision. And it's only good for 14 days. And within that 14-day period, there has to be then a petition for a final hearing. And at that final hearing, it's kind of like a mini trial, and evidence is put on. There's an opportunity for cross-examining witnesses, and the judge is going to make a determination by clear and convincing evidence whether the standard is met. So all of that is the process that's in place today, and there is just no need for people to be able to walk in off the street. Like what's happening now, or what's happened with domestic violence injunctions and dating violence injunctions and all these others where people can just walk in off the street, handwrite out on a piece of paper, and the courts get clogged up. I don't think the court system could handle it or should be handling it because there's just no need for it. So I don't support it, but I think we got it right with what we have. I think it's a very well-crafted law, and at least here in Pinellas County and most places in Florida, is that it's working well. We made a big push for it here. We emphasize the training. We have a dedicated unit, a risk protection order unit. We have a dedicated lawyer that's doing it. And if we're not leading the state, we're right at the top in the state for the number of petitions and orders that have been issued because of the emphasis and because of the training. So it's a big deal, and it's making a difference.
Okay, so you might be wondering, great, so Florida's got one. What other states have these laws on the books? Well, there are 17 of them currently, including Florida and the District of Columbia, that have passed some sort of red flag legislation. You're looking at a map right now. 4 other states have red flag laws currently under consideration. One of them, as you can see, being Ohio, where one of the weekend's mass shootings took place. Texas, where the other one happened, has nothing. right now, either in the works or on the books. Here's a big one. Why do people oppose red flag laws, you might be wondering? Well, I mean, quite frankly, there are those who say it is an infringement upon the Second Amendment rights of U.S. citizens. We have the rights as American citizens to keep and bear arms. This is an instance where, under a red flag law, the government can come in and take your guns, okay? And that is the basis for most of the opposition to red flag laws. And then most importantly, I think in this conversation, do these laws work, okay? Because why would we even be talking about them if they didn't work? I asked Sheriff Gualtieri about that, and specifically, could they have prevented the Parkland shooting? Here's what he told me.
You know, generally you try and stay away from what ifs and hypotheticals and having a crystal ball, but I can tell you is that based upon what I know and what we know now, is that there would have been more than sufficient evidence, sufficient information there to get a risk protection order against Nicholas Cruz. Now, that is also dependent upon somebody bringing it forward and having that on the table. But if somebody had and it was available to law enforcement, there's no question that it would have met the criteria. Now, the bar is pretty high. You know, we have to show by clear and convincing evidence that the standard is met. But in the Cruz case, with everything that was there and by his behavior, by his writings, by the statements that he made to others, that would have been a tool that was available.
Interesting stuff there from Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, the Pinellas County Sheriff. And I want to also give you a little bit more of our conversation. Here's what he told me about what his department is doing about this, how they're leading the way. His office is really one of the leaders in the state in terms of putting this process in place, and the amount of weapons and the amount of risk protection orders that they have executed just in the last year.
Do you know any idea, ballpark, how many actual weapons have been taken?
A lot. I mean a lot. It isn't just weapons, it's also the ammunition. And we've had times where they go out with a van to collect some of this because there's so much. The other thing is a very important aspect of this, and it shouldn't be lost in the discussion, is not only does that order prevent somebody from owning and possessing, but it also prevents them from purchasing. And that's something that is a big deal, especially when somebody's Baker acted, because even let's say, okay, that they had a gun, we Baker acted them, they were taken into custody, and they're back home, and let's say a family member, removed the gun so it's not there, but nothing was stopping them from going down and buying 5 more guns. Or as it's reported by the media, and I don't have any personal knowledge of it, the shooter in Dayton, he ordered it online from a place in Texas, had it delivered to a gun store in Dayton, and that's where he went and picked it up. So none of that, unless there's something in place that prevents it, like a risk protection order, is going to stop that from happening.
So look, there it is in a nutshell. Hopefully you got some good information out of that, and you are a little bit more understanding of what these red flag laws or risk protection orders are that we're talking about in the news, and you hear people like the president and other lawmakers all talking about this week. If you have any other questions, hit us up on all the social media channels. You know how to get a hold of us. We will get your questions answered. And of course, we always want to hear from you. So if you have concerns, reach out. This is an ongoing conversation, and you are one of the most important parts of that.